Marker legend, documented consensus, evidence plus interpretation, hypothesis speculation flagged on screen. Every empire leaves a record. Some records were never meant to be found. This is file No. 010. Look closely at the wall of a temple in southern Egypt. There is a figure here, a king, crowned, making offerings to the gods. But where the face should be, there is only a rough scar in the limestone. The name that once sat inside the royal cartouche has been chiseled into nothing. Someone stood on this spot with a copper tool and a mallet, and they worked patiently to make a pharaoh disappear. Here is what should trouble you. The person they were trying to erase was one of the most successful rulers Egypt ever produced. 2 decades of peace, trade expeditions to the ends of the known world, monuments so fine they still stand 35 centuries later. And the erasing didn't happen in a fit of rage. It happened 20 years too late for that. The popular story tells you this was a crime of passion. The evidence tells you it was something colder. Tonight we separate the myth from the record. Her name was Hatshepsut. She ruled as pharaoh of Egypt's 18th dynasty in the 15th century before our era, the height of the New Kingdom, Egypt at its wealthiest and most powerful. She was born to royalty, daughter of King Thutmose I. She married her own half-brother, Thutmose II, as was the custom of the royal house. When her husband died young, the throne passed to a boy, Thutmose III, the son of her husband by a secondary wife. The child was too young to rule, so Hatshepsut governed as regent, as royal women had done before her, and then she did something almost no woman in 3,000 years of pharaonic history would do. Around the 7th year of that regency, she stopped acting on the boy king's behalf and took the full titles of a pharaoh in her own right. The crook, the flail, the royal names, even the ceremonial false beard of kingship. She did not depose the boy. He remained co-king. But she was the senior partner. She was, in the language of the monuments, His Majesty. Now, a lesser ruler would have spent that power holding on. Hatshepsut spent it building. Her reign, roughly 1479 to 1458 before our era, was not marked by great wars. It was marked by wealth. She sent a trading fleet down the Red Sea to a land the Egyptians called Punt, most likely on the coast of the southern Red Sea, in the region of modern Eritrea or Somalia. They came back loaded with myrrh, frankincense, ebony, ivory, gold, and living incense trees carried in baskets to be replanted in Egyptian soil. We know this because she carved the entire expedition, the ships, the sailors, the exotic goods, even the famously heavy-set Queen of Punt, onto the walls of her mortuary temple. The reliefs are a boast set in stone, look what I brought home, and that temple. At a place called Deir el-Bahari, against a wall of golden cliffs on the west bank of the Nile at Thebes, she built one of the most elegant structures in the ancient world, a temple of rising terraces and colonnades called Djeser-Djeseru, the Holy of Holies. It is a masterpiece. It is also the scene of the crime, because everywhere across her monuments, at Deir el-Bahari, at the great temple of Karnak, archaeologists found the same wound. Her image hacked away, her cartouches emptied and often recarved with the names of her father, her husband, or her stepson. In the 1920s, an American excavator named Herbert Winlock, digging near her temple, found a pit filled with her shattered statues, smashed faces, broken bodies of the woman king dumped in a quarry hole and forgotten. Someone had tried to unmake a pharaoh, and for most of the 20th century, everyone thought they knew exactly who and exactly why. Here is the story you have probably heard. The boy she sidelined, Thutmose III, grew up in her shadow. He watched a woman wear the crown that was rightfully his. He seethed for 20 years, and the moment she died, he took his revenge. He sent his men out across Egypt to smash her face from every wall, to scratch out her name, to condemn her to the second death the Egyptians feared most, to be forgotten forever. It is a satisfying story, a wronged prince, a stolen throne. Vengeance served in stone, it has been repeated in documentaries and books for generations. There is just one problem. The timeline doesn't work. Here is the fact that breaks the revenge theory. When Egyptologists looked carefully at when the erasure happened, studying the sequence of carving, the styles, the way later kings' names were layered over hers, the evidence pointed to something no one expected. The campaign to erase Hatshepsut did not begin when she died. The most detailed epigraphic study, by the scholar Charles Nims and later by the Egyptologist Peter Dorman, places the start of the destruction late in Thutmose III's long reign, plausibly around his 42nd year on the throne. Do the arithmetic. Hatshepsut died around Thutmose's 22nd regnal year. If the erasure began near year 42, then he waited roughly 20 years to act. Now ask yourself, is that revenge? Rage is hot. Rage acts. A man who spent 2 decades boiling with hatred does not, on the day his tormentor finally dies, calmly do nothing. And then, 20 years later, as an old king near the end of his own life, suddenly remember to be furious. Hatred has a shelf life. This chisel came far too late to be personal. So if not revenge, then what? This is where the modern consensus turns the story on its head. Egyptologists, including Peter Dorman and Catherine Rohrig, whose work anchored the Metropolitan Museum of Art's major reassessment of Hatshepsut, argue the erasure was not emotional at all. It was political, cold, calculated. Consider what Thutmose III faced late in his reign. He was preparing to hand the throne to his own son, the future Amenhotep II, and there, carved into the most sacred walls in Egypt, stood an inconvenient fact, that a woman had once held the full power of kingship, that the throne could pass sideways, to a regent, to a female. In a system where a king's legitimacy flowed in an unbroken male line, father to son, Hatshepsut was a precedent. And precedents are dangerous, so the record was edited, erase her from the wall, and the line of succession reads cleanly, Thutmose I to the second to the third to Amenhotep. The woman king vanishes, and with her vanishes the awkward idea that a woman could ever legitimately wear the crown. It wasn't an attack on Hatshepsut the person, it was the removal of Hatshepsut the precedent. And there is a second clue that points the same way. Amenhotep II, the son this was all meant to protect, went on to claim some of Hatshepsut's monuments and building works as his own, without crediting his father either. This wasn't one man's private grudge. This was a dynasty managing its own image, smoothing the story of how power passed, generation to generation. Legitimacy engineered in limestone. Now, the archivist deals in evidence, not certainty, so let me be precise about what we don't know. The exact year the erasure began is still debated. Around year 42 is the leading reconstruction, not a signed confession. We do not have Thutmose III's diary. We cannot read his mind across 3,500 years. It is possible some resentment existed alongside the politics. And the erasure was selective. Some of her images survived, some in hard-to-reach places, which tells us this was practical statecraft, not a berserk rampage that missed nothing. But the core finding is solid, and it is what matters. The long delay is the fact that will not fit the revenge story. Whatever else was true, the erasure was late. It was deliberate, and it served the future, not the past. There is something almost more chilling in the cold version than the hot one. A crime of passion, at least, remembers its victim. It burns because she mattered. But this treated a 20-year reign, a woman who ruled an empire in peace and prosperity, as a formatting error, a line to be edited out so the paragraph would read smoothly. And here is the irony the editors could not have foreseen. They failed. We know her name. We stand in her temple. The very scars they left on the stone, the empty cartouches, the hacked-out faces, are now the loudest evidence that she existed, and that someone, later, needed very badly for her not to. An erasure this thorough is itself a kind of monument. It records exactly what was feared. So consider the case. A ruler erased not in fury, but in strategy. Not to punish a woman, but to unwrite a possibility. The chisel that came 2 decades too late to be hatred, and right on time to be politics. The record remains. Draw your own conclusions. This was file No. 010. The archive stays open. If this file found you, there are others. Next, in Buried Truth, we open a case where the evidence was not erased. It was buried on purpose. Follow the archive, and we'll see you in the next file.